We were in bed, in an apartment, and there's like a train, something like a train hit, just sort of a metallic kind of a clash, and then our stepson called us and told us, get up, get out, or turn the TV on. And we watched this really slow fume right after the plane had hit. It was still settling, stuff was still flying out in different directions. And we were right near a hospital. So we figured, well, if we're near the hospital, we could help somehow. Then the second plane hit, and then we knew that for sure there's no accident. So we looked at the Statue of Liberty, and we looked up the Empire State Building. So we better brace up because we're probably not going anywhere for a very long time. And that was the beginning of a very long meditative process, because you didn't want to see it, you didn't want to leave. But when the fewer people that went out from the hospital didn't come back, all of the emergency people went out in one direction, and they didn't come back. And we were lined up for blood. It says, there's no blood. I said, well, there are no people? It says, no, there's nothing. It took a week to synthesize everything, because physically you had to breathe stuff, which is a problem, even though we were just 2 miles away from the impact surface. And so we realized that, wow, what if we were a mile away from the impact surface? The closer you were, the less hope there was. And there was one area where there was nothing at all for a long, long period of time. I mean, nothing. So it's difficult to capture that in your mind if you know you have to live with it forever. And then I thought to myself, well, let's see, you painted flat on the ground and you used to paint with this lyrical movement. I said, what about that part that you didn't see but you felt, the impact? But we felt that in our body and we didn't see it, and we didn't want to see the impact. That silvery gold, silver flash, and then the rest is burned. That's what I felt in myself as I painted in a circular way, and pushed the paint away from the center, and then put a curve of what happens if you're underneath it and the center is at the top. And so these flashes go outward. I was embracing the parts I didn't want to see and encountering them rather than the parts that I saw, the aftermath. And the end of the painting was the aftermath.
My name is Catherine Ripley. People call me Kat, and I'm the newest elected member of the Board of Governors for Pima Community College. I'm a retired naval officer. I spent 26 years in the Navy. I went to the Naval Academy back when they were first letting women in, and after retirement I served here in Tucson working at Raytheon for about 5 years, and then decided to retire again and started teaching here at Pima Community College as an adjunct professor in the political science department, where I actually taught us created a class called Understanding Terrorism. On September 11th, 2001, I was actually stationed in the U.S. Embassy in The Hague, Netherlands. I was one of the military attachés, and we watched it unfold. The first plane had hit the first tower, but like most people, we stood in utter shock. We were all standing. Some people were in tears, but most of us were just aghast. We didn't know what to think. And then, as you know, it was 8:45, 9:03, the second plane hit the second tower, and then everything unfolded from there. 9:37, I believe, was when the Pentagon got hit. And at that time, we were in action mode because we were at a U.S. Embassy, which was, in our minds, going to be another target. My strongest memory is the morning after. We went up the stairs, we went into the colonel's office, which was facing a courtyard, a few floors up this building, facing a courtyard, and we were all literally lost our breath. It was breathtaking because the vision was this sea of thousands of bouquets of flowers. And that was the first time I actually broke down in tears, because it showed this is the legacy that people will come together in times of crisis, and especially in times of great crisis like violence, war, pandemic, which we see right now. And for a fleeting moment, the entire world was on our side as Americans. And I know that other embassies in Europe and across the globe probably felt the same thing. This outpouring of not just support and allyship, but human love and human kindness and human empathy. It was 20 years ago, and it's still as if it happened yesterday. I had friends and family that worked at the Pentagon that were in New York City, and it's still a strong memory for many of us. And so I just want to send out my love and support to all of the families who lost loved ones on that day.
I was still reeling from the shock of waking up to the images of the buildings being destroyed and coming down. But I knew that in a couple hours I had a class. I had a class, an art appreciation class at 11:15. And you know, what I teach them is about humanity and our linked feelings and the visual arts and how they are linked. And I knew that we all needed support, we all needed contention, we needed connection and comfort. And I knew some students were going to fumble into the class because some of us were kind of in automatic mode. I grabbed some good drawing paper that I had, even though it wasn't a drawing class, and I grabbed some extra pencils. And I went and printed out some FEMA information about the stages of loss and shock when it comes to an event, even though there were no events like that before. And I went into the classroom, and slowly they all started coming into the classroom. And I said, today we're not talking about history. We're talking about, whatever you guys is in your head. I know we're all in shock. Whatever is haunting you, whatever you're feeling, let's put it down into paper, because there's a healing quality to that. There were few words, because sometimes the emotions are bigger than the words, and everybody grabbed those pencils and started putting their feelings down. And I told them not to judge themselves, as to how well or not they were drawing. And they went ahead and they drew. I drew along with them. And then from my sketch, there was a painting that I went into my studio, and I had other work that I needed to do, but I just had to get it out because it was haunting me as well. And I kept those drawings. And every time when September comes around, I open that folder and I look at them, and I remember that day. It feels like a hazy memory. But in the moment that I look at the drawings, it's almost like I'm back in that classroom with them. When I look at my own sketch, I'm back inside those feelings. It was a moment in which we were all together. And today, looking back at that, it feels almost romantic. It feels almost sweet to think of our country coming together and feeling together and grieving together. Personally, for me, doing the work that I did, I always say I vomited out all of my feelings into the canvas. And I personally, as an artist, had a judgment in my own mind, with a master's degree and everything, as to what really was good art, and the art that the world needed and the art that the world did not need. And I did not think that really I would ever do art that was violent or that was dramatic, because I felt that there was plenty of that in the world. And when I did it just for myself. That semester, there were a couple of teachers that brought their students through my studio for us, just like a little tour. And some of them mentioned to the teachers, they actually wrote responses onto the visit, that seeing the work helped them grieve and helped them heal. And it really kind of blew my mind, because I could not think of why from my pain anybody else was going to heal. But then eventually I realized that that's what the arts do. Like the same way that when I'm sad, I listen to sad music. And the same way when I'm angry, I listen to some really heavy rock. Art helps us channel our feelings. Nobody in particular talked about it, but there was a bonding that happened that semester that was different. That was very different. Also, 2 months later, my father died. And they knew I was going through that moment of transition and running to the hospital. So we were all going through so much. And some people had friends in New York that they knew of. So it was definitely a bonding experience. I don't think we'll ever forget each other.
Like so many of you, I can remember 9/11. I didn't hear about the attacks until I arrived at my office at Centralia College in Washington State. Everyone was in the break room watching the tragedy on TV. Like many, at first I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was somehow not real, yet all too real. Over the next few days, it was like the world came to a halt. I remember stories of people enlisting in the military in the days and weeks following the attacks. As a veteran, I understood their impulse to take action to make a difference. In the years since, I have been to the One World Trade Tower in Lower Manhattan. I've been to Ground Zero. It's a solemn place. For myself and many Americans, 9/11 drove home how dangerous a place the world could be. But there is another more hopeful perspective that has taken hold. I'd like to share with you two images. Both were taken in Tucson shortly after the attacks. One is of a prayer vigil held at a local synagogue. The other is a prayer service held at a local mosque. Only a few days after the atrocity, when emotions were at their most raw, when anger filled the air like ash, these people came together to reject hate. They came together to embrace hope. I'm also struck by the young people in the photo. Some of those young people may have attended Pima in the years since the attacks. Some may be attending Pima this semester. As educators, we have a responsibility to impart to all our students the importance of respect and acceptance. That is especially true today when so many groups are demonized as the other. It is hard to think ill of someone you know, someone you've broken bread with. The world faces many challenges, from climate change to a racial reckoning. The only way we can surmount these challenges is by building bridges to understanding. If we can teach our students to hear all voices, to respect all voices, then in our own small but consequential way, we will help honor the legacy of those who perished 20 years ago today. Thank you.